Hi, Life Group leaders. Thank you for joining us today. I'm glad we can do this on video. The Three Musketeers are here, and Richard's going to lead us as we walk through a wonderful, wonderful text. Before he kicks us off, let me remind your people that following our first service, before we go to our life groups, we'll be having a special called business meeting. I don't believe it'll take very long. And our personnel and search team will be presenting Matt to be voted on as our senior pastor. And so if you could help us get that communicated out, we'd appreciate it. We're excited about it. Sunday's going to be a good day. And hopefully you can be there. Okay? Well, Richard, are you ready?
I'm ready to go.
Let's go.
All right. Well, as you know, this is the last lesson in our quarter, what we call the winter quarter from our quarterlies. And this is not the last lesson in Luke, since the next quarter is going to deal with Luke as well. Luke is it's a long book, and it's a very detailed book. And, of course, we know that because he set about to give a detailed chronology of the life and ministry of Jesus. The lesson is entitled Ashamed, and that's consistent with the one-word titles that we've seen throughout this quarter. And of course, that concept takes its name from, or the title comes from one of the verses in our passage from Luke 9:18 to 27, by the way. And that's in verse 26, where Jesus says, "For whoever is ashamed of me and of my words, of him will the Son of Man be ashamed when he comes in his glory and the glory of the Father and of the holy angels." And we'll get into that a little bit later. But the title also reminds me of what Paul says very emphatically in chapter 1 of Romans, where he says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, and to the Jew first and also to the Greek." So what I'm going to do this Sunday is take that word ashamed and alter it a little bit and expand it from one word. I'm going to go with unashamed of the gospel. Because within these verses, we can look at four qualities of a living faith, a strong faith that demonstrates that we're unashamed of the gospel. And so let me just give you that broad outline. Perhaps it'd be helpful to you. I'm not going to go into the great detail that I will on Sunday in the Sunday school class, life group class. But I'm going to focus on four parts within these verses. And the first is, I'm going to speak to a faith that confesses, and that will be found taken from verses 18 to 20. Secondly, it'll be a faith that obeys, which we can look at verse 21 and 22. And then faith that follows, verses 23 to 25. And then faith that declares, unashamedly declares, in verses 26 to 27. So if you think about it, a really strong faith is an unashamed faith, and it speaks to and walks in these four qualities that I just went through. And as we've talked about in recent weeks, recent months, and we've seen in the news, it is going to become a little less easy to proclaim and declare our faith unashamedly in Christ. I shouldn't say it'd be more difficult, but we're going to be called, what's the word I'm looking for? We're going to be attacked, I guess you could say, or ridiculed. Faith has always been ridiculed in every age.
That's right.
But it hasn't really been attacked here. And I think we're starting to see indications of that, and I think we can assume that there's going to be more, expect that there's going to be more. And really, this phenomenon speaks to what the German pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer talked about in his book called The Cost of Discipleship, or the cost of a living faith. It does come with a cost. For him, confessing, obeying, following, and declaring Christ cost him his life when he went back to his country to save it from the Nazis. He had a love for his country, and he wanted to share the gospel boldly and proclaim it without any shame or fear. And I think that we may be facing that some in this country. Perhaps it won't cost us our lives, but it's going to cost us some things. So as we go through this lesson today, or here in a few minutes, I want you to think about those 4 areas and what it means to unabashedly and unashamedly declare the gospel. And before I get into speaking a little bit to each of those 4 areas, I just asked Tom and Gary if they got anything they'd like to add.
Well, the only thing that hits me is that being unashamed is going to require some boldness and confidence, probably some contentedness that we're comfortable in our skin, but it's going to flesh out differently for each of us. And I think that one thing you might do, life group leaders, is to challenge your people to say, how does this shake out for you? How does it look like for you? Or what is it going to look like for you? And make your decision now based upon what you might think will be coming later. Because we're all going to be challenged. And we have to determine now how we're going to react to that. So that was the only thing I thought. Great outline. That's a preaching outline. I'm going to have to write that down and preach it one day. Or let him come preach it, huh?
Yeah. Have you been to seminary or something?
No.
There you go.
Gary?
I agree with what you said. I'm still kind of thinking 3 or 4 lessons ago, the term when Jesus called Peter, said, "Follow me and I'll make you fishers of men." The term "follow me" is again repeated, and to Peter and the disciples, and to follow and really be willing to follow him. You can't be ashamed.
That's
You gotta be all in to follow, and of course deny yourself. And so that's my thoughts on that.
Good.
Well, I guess that kind of speaks to what we talked about a couple of weeks ago. Being a follower of Christ is a whole lot different than being a fan of Christ.
Yes.
And it comes with a cost.
That's good.
Looking at these verses 18 to 20 and speaking about a faith that confesses Christ, these are relatively familiar verses, but you see in there when he asks, "Who do the crowd say that I am?" They say what? They say, well, you're John the Baptist. Other people say you're Elijah, and others that you're one of the prophets of old. And then Jesus asks a very piercing question to them.
That's right.
And he says, "But who do you say I am?" And of course, Peter is recorded as saying, "Well, you are the Christ of God." And one of the things I thought about as I read these verses is that it seems like at least 3 or 4 times a year, and it's usually around Easter, so get ready for it, and around Christmas, we see Time magazine or some television special that will say, "In search of Jesus." Well, Jesus is not lost. People are lost. He doesn't need to be found. I mean, he needs to be found, but he is not lost. Or the real Jesus, or who was Jesus. And of course, those sound like we're really going to get to the heart of the matter, but what it starts to do when it puts a question mark on it is place doubt in somebody's mind. Well, maybe he wasn't who I think he was. So be ready for that. And, you still hear today, when we talk about who was Jesus, some people say what? He was a good man, or he was a great teacher, or he was a prophet. All of it is designed to say nice things about Jesus, but it denies the truth of who he really was and is, and always will be. So we still see some of that today. But again, I think the key point here in faith that confesses Christ is Jesus posing the question, and Tom spoke to this a minute ago, is who do you say I am? And that begs the question for our class members is, who do we say he is? And who are we prepared to say that he is when we are challenged or our faith is challenged? But it's a question that all people must answer, and whatever their answer is will define their eternity forever. Right. Their destiny for eternity is what I meant to say. We are people we are a culture that puts people in categories more and more, right? I mean, it's cultural, it's political for sure, it's economic, it's geographical, it's whatever, but there's only 2 categories that matter. That's right. And those people that confess Christ and those that don't. Ultimately, that's all that matters. All this other noise, sound, and fury signifies really nothing from an eternal standpoint. And the point there, too, is that nobody else, I guess you could reiterate this. I think people know it, but maybe not everybody knows it or fully appreciates it, that we have to confess Christ.
That's right.
Our parents can't say, well, my children are all Christians, or, my grandparents were Christians. I come from a long line of Christians. No, we all have to come to it individually. So, and one other thing I would just mention there, because I thought it was interesting. When you look at the word confessing, that is usually associated with admitting that you've done something wrong. They confess to a crime, whether it's, I confess to stealing that car, or I confess, something trivial like I confess I didn't take out the trash this morning. Well, I should have, but I didn't. Okay, so you're saying it's all on me. But in this context, confessing is a positive thing when it comes to confessing Christ. So I just thought that was kind of
Richard,
interesting.
you nailed it, because in the New Testament, confession is just not admitting, but it's an agreeing.
That's right.
A declaration.
It's a declaration. So when I confess my sin, I'm agreeing with God, I have sinned, or I am a sinner. So it is a positive, and that's of course what's brought out in our text.
One thing here that it seems like Peter didn't have to think about it. The question was from Jesus to all that is to them, who do you say I am? And instantly, very impulsively, which is good, very confidently, Peter answered the Christ of God, or God's Messiah. So he had this secure in his mind, his belief, his faith, who Jesus was. It had already been witnessed and experienced, so he was quick to answer, and I like that.
Good point.
And the last thing I would say, I wrote this down, and maybe it'll be useful to you. In this life, confessing may cost something, but in the life to come, not confessing will cost us everything.
Wow. That's
point.
a good
So
point.
I think that's a good capstone or finish point on that point. The second point I would make about a faith that is unashamed, it's a faith that obeys Christ. And that, looking at verses 21 to 22. And really, Christ is commanding them not to do something here, which is do not tell who I am to anyone, which, as far as I know, this is the only place in Scripture where he tells his disciples not to declare who he is. They obey that, even though they may wonder why. It would seem to me, if you really believe that, and this is indicting, by the way, if we really believe that, we would want to tell everybody, right? But he's not really saying don't declare, and my view of this is not yet. We'll declare on my good timing. So, but the disciples, represented by Peter, of course, here, as Gary said, they obeyed this command. And I think that one aspect of faith is that we obey and we follow, even though we may not fully comprehend.
That's right.
And there's lots of things in the Bible we do not understand, and we're reduced to saying, because the Bible says so.
That's right.
I'll understand it in due course. I don't understand it now. So there may have been some of that in play here. Let's see here. There was a couple of things, too, or a couple of points that I wanted to make about this, that obedience is a barometer of the reality and strength of our faith, isn't it? I mean, if we love God, if we confess God, if we confess Christ, we are going to obey him. So our level of obedience is a good check about, am I obeying in every aspect of my life? But as Gary pointed out, he said it and they obeyed it immediately and willingly. And they were not like the rich young man that we find in Matthew 19. We know that. He came up to Jesus and said, "Teacher, what good deed must I do to have eternal life?" And Jesus said, "Why do you ask me about what is good? There is only one who is good. If you would enter this life, keep the commandments." And of course he says, "Well, which ones?" It's almost like you could keep some of them. He says all of them. And he lists the big ones, right? You shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, love your neighbor. And Jesus and the young man said, "I've done all of these. What do I still lack?" And Jesus knew. And what did he still lack? Go sell everything you have. Give up everything. And give to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven. And then come and follow me.
Yeah.
And he went away sad and sorrowful because that was an area of obedience he could not quite get to. So I think questions for each of us who claim Christ and want to be fully obedient to him, do we fully comprehend what obedience means?
That's good.
It is immediate and it is complete. Now, are we going to do that perfectly? No. But that's part of that whole sanctification process. We can always do more. We can always do more. We can always do more. So those are the points I would make there at this point. You guys got any comments on that before we go to the
Good to me.
I'm good.
Thirdly is faith that follows Christ, and those are found in verses 23 to 25. And again, we read those verses, and we know them or recognize them at least, maybe not be able to recite them, but we certainly nod at them, and we certainly sing the song when it comes to following him. As he says in verse 23, take up your cross daily and follow me. We sing the song, I have decided to follow Jesus, and we like the melody and we can sing the words. The question is, do we live them out?
Right.
We express our belief in Jesus and say we want to or that we do follow Jesus, but when we simply regard him highly or think of him as a prophet or as a teacher, we are denying who he really is. We're not following him. We're denying him. And so we need to be careful that we don't get drawn in by the people even today who still say that he was maybe a nice man and a good teacher. But when they say that, they are denying who he is. And then the other reference, if you want another reference to it's the rich young man who also committed to follow Jesus. He says, I will follow you wherever you go. And that was Jesus' response to that was Jesus' command to the rich young man. And again, it comes with a cost to follow Christ. Sure. And increasingly it's going to come with a cost. We've kind of seen a little glimpse of that. We talk about cost of discipleship or cost of following Jesus. And I don't mean to diminish this, but if you want to see what that's like and how that will cause us to make choices and isolate us and sometimes ostracize us, think about what we have seen lately in the cost of our politics.
That's right.
It's cost us relationships. It's going to cost people jobs. It's going to cost freedoms and that kind of thing. So that is maybe a glimpse into what it's going to be like. It hasn't cost us our life yet, but it could. Let's see here.
A couple of thoughts on that one verse is so full, that verse 23. We could spend hours on that one.
Yeah.
If anyone would come after me, he must deny himself. What's that mean, to deny yourself? And take up your cross monthly, weekly, daily. Every morning I've got to decide. Right. Who am I going to follow him, or am I going to follow me, or follow you, or follow some new trend? So the whole, and is follow me an order? Was he pointing his finger at, or was it more of an invitation? I don't see this as a edict. I see it more as a choice. We get a choice to follow ourselves or follow. So that whole sentence there, that verse, is so full of meaning that we could go a lot of different directions in our class to talk about what's it really mean to follow. And one of my sayings, it's impossible to leave first and follow. So if I don't stop and make a decision every day to follow him, I'll usually leave without him, and I'll do what I'm going to do, not what he wants us to do.
Yeah. I think discipleship is a perhaps a balance. I don't know if that's the right term, between disciplines and devotion. And verse 23 has that. deny himself, that requires discipline. Because none of us wanted to deny ourselves. And I think back when the snow was here, Jeff and his family were with us. Of course, when we know they're coming, we go to the store and buy things me and Paula really don't need. And it's a lot easier to not indulge if you don't have it. But for some reason, she picked up a lot of cookies and Oreos and graham crackers.
Homemade vanilla ice cream.
Yeah, and every time I walked through the kitchen, I knew that these new Oreo cookie things, you just pull open the top because they self-seal back. Well, you got to get at least 3. 2's not enough. And it started telling on my gut.
Yeah.
Well, there's always disciplines. It's kind of a silly illustration. But that's part of discipleship.
Yeah.
Saying no to yourself. And then, of course, take up your cross. That's devotion. And he's worthy. We see the cross that he's going to ultimately die on. And we see the worth of that, and our heart goes to that. So we deny by disciplines, we follow by devotion. And I think in that mixture, whatever that balance is for each life, that defines a pretty healthy definition, perhaps, of discipleship.
Yep.
One of the, it's a quote somebody made some time ago, and I've heard it, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but it really speaks to what what it means to deny yourself and take up your cross daily, and it's all kind of encapsulated in this question that I think is what this gentleman had said some time ago. And the question is, are we prepared to give up that which we cannot keep for that which we cannot lose?
Yeah, Jim Elliott, the missionary.
Yeah, Elliott. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And then I just want to read something that you can probably just Google this, just a couple words of it, and it'll pop up. But it's by the great pastor J.C. Ryle, and he said this. He said, "The loss of the soul is the heaviest loss that can befall a man.
Wow.
The worst and most painful of diseases, the most distressing bankruptcy of fortune, the most disastrous shipwrecks are a mere scratch of a pen compared to the loss of a soul."
Wow.
And that's pretty strong stuff. And he's right. And that is really what's in these verses, as Gary pointed out, especially in verse 24. So now I'm just going to wrap up with a discussion about faith that declares Christ. And this is where we get into that whoever is ashamed of me words of Christ. And, of course, the other end of that is whoever is ashamed of me, of him I will be ashamed. Or really, whoever is not bold enough or is too ashamed to declare me, I'm going to be unashamed of him. I think the most terrifying words that anyone can hear is, "I never knew you."
That's right.
I think close behind that has got to be the distressing words, too, of, "I'm ashamed of you because you were ashamed of me." But how can we be ashamed of Christ? What are some ways we can be ashamed of Christ? When we're afraid to let people know that we are followers of Christ and we love him? When we deny his teachings and his precepts or deny who he is? Or when we let fear silence us? I don't think I'll say anything. I think I'd rather be liked than be faithful. But being ashamed of Christ is really an indication that we don't fully believe what we say we believe,
right.
or there's
right.
stronger faith that we can still develop. And in the worst cases, in some of the worst cases, it shows that we care more for the praise of men than the approval of God. And, it even shows an ingratitude for his grace in saving us and his mercy in forgiving us. I mean, we kind of presume on that grace and that mercy.
That's good.
Or as somebody put it, it shows his cost of dying for us is not worth our cost of living for him.
Wow.
We want all the goodies, but we don't want to, make the investment or have the discipline. So, but those are the 4 areas I'm going to focus on, and a little bit of an overview. I hope that was not too much detail. But, guys,
It's great. Gary, got anything to add?
I just kind of recap what we had already talked. I think where I'm going to go is to really, again, try to apply what things do I need to do different to deny myself and follow Him, and actually be willing to follow, and not step out on my own and then only ask for help or guidance or whatever when I get in the ditch or whatever. So it's really kind of an application there. So that's where all this is. Again, follow me, I think, is an invitation, not an edict, but an opportunity to follow Him. So, and then He describes how to do that. So,
Okay. The only thing I would add, maybe at the end, life group leaders, the thing that I try to remind myself when I'm in pressure situations that would maybe cause me to be intimidated, is to remind myself of God's grace. I think you have to have a healthy concept of yourself. Now, you can become morbid and go overboard, but it helps us to realize the grace of God that saves us. It's the grace of God that sustains us. And there's nothing to be ashamed about here. This great God, in the exercise of His will, according to the affections of His heart, saved us. Mm-hmm. And my goodness, if God would do that by sacrificing His only begotten Son, then no matter what this world throws at us, it's going to be worthy of whatever the pressure is. And so being cognizant of grace has helped me, and it helps me, I think, with some internal strength. And so you might want to throw that out. So, Richard, good job, bro.
Good job.
Thank you.
The only thing I would wrap up with is just one thought I just thought about, is that if we, except for somebody that had the faith to confess Christ, the faith to obey Christ in sharing His word, the faith to follow Him, and the faith to declare Him, where would any of us be?
Yeah, that's a good
Amen.
point. Really good point.
So I hope all this was helpful. Hope we're back to normal this Sunday. And again, remember there's a business meeting as we kick off the 9:30 hour before we go to Life Group. Make it a good week.
There you go.